Today I'm gonna show you how to make music like How to Train Your Dragon and how I went from this to this. First I play the entire thing, and after that I'll show you what every single instrument is doing and explain the process of making this piece step by step. My main benchmarks while creating this piece were Test Drive from How to Train Your Dragon by John Powell and also The Flight to Neverland from Hook by John Williams. At the beginning we have the ear candy. The ear candy stuff is divided into two parts. First part, celeste, glockenspiel, vibraphone and cortales playing the chords. And the other part is marimba and xylophone playing these filler hits. I play those with the context of the chords because they are switching the rhythm meanwhile, and I want you to notice that. Together with that we also have a single layer of the choir. Serving just as a background texture. Next up we have a couple of new additions. First one is obviously the piano and harp transitions layered with the celeste. Glockenspiel, vibraphone and cortales remain unchanged. Other things are the transitions in between phrases. In these spots where the harp is playing the transition, I brought all of the other instruments down. So the harp alone felt a little empty, and I decided to use marimba and xylophone rolls to give them sort of a background texture. And I also added very low notes of the music box to give the chord progression a little bit more warmth and energy. Here also the choir is changing a bit. In this part we have sopranos playing two different things, a simple triad and those syllables. Next up we also have a string section together with the sub bass. And here you can see which notes of the chords are being played by which string. Most of them are split into divisi. So this is violin 1, this is violin 2, this is viola, this is cello and double bass. Last things in this part are the percussions. Here we have a cymbal swell, couple of triangle hits, tam-tam and bass drum marking the transition, and also a tambourine supporting the rhythm of the chords. Next up, at the end of the intro, we have a little transition over here. That's giving you a little heads up that something new is gonna happen. From top to bottom we have woodwinds, cymbal swell, piatti and triangle hits, tambourine rolls, tam-tam, tiny snare roll, and also bass drum and timpani rolls. Within the ear candy, the same thing as the woodwinds is being played by the piano and marimba, together with a harp and cortales runs. Now we can move on to the first climax. Let's cover the main theme first. The theme is being played by the entire woodwind section. Violin 1 and violin 2 both split into divisi, playing in octaves and also supported a little by the viola down here. Viola is also playing the part of the chords. And the last element playing the main theme is the glockenspiel. And if you listen to the song very closely, you can also hear a little counter melody being played by the trumpets. I play them together with the violins so you get the context. Next thing are the chords. Chords are being played by the viola, cello, double bass, sub bass and also the choir. As I mentioned before, the viola is split into divisi, also playing the theme, and the choir is being split into two parts. One is playing the chords, one is playing the rhythmic pattern with the chords together with the brass. Together with the violins, it sounds like this. When it comes to the ear candy, they are still playing the pattern from the intro, as well as a couple of runs, as the harp for example, and those fills in between the phrases together with the brass. One tiny addition, probably inaudible in the entire mix, is an addition of bell hits. Bell is also supporting the transition before the action cue. Now we can move on to the brass section. From the top, first we have the horn. Four trombones. When it comes to rhythmic staccato patterns like this, you always have to remember that you have to play with the volume and dynamics of every single note. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, this is the automation of the expression. This is basically a volume knob. And here I'm controlling the dynamics, the amount of energy the player is putting into every single note. Looking at this right now, I could play around with this even more. As you can see, when I highlight the notes, every single note from this chord, for example, has the exact same amount of dynamics. In a scenario like this, when we have 4 trombone players, this would probably look something like this, where every note has slightly different dynamics. But I layered it together with 2 horns, and they also have their own volume and dynamics to them, so the overall result is okay. But just wanted to point out that I could do some more tweaking over here. Together they sound like this. As you can hear, sometimes horn stick out more, sometimes the trombones, so overall they are balancing each other and they feel more realistic that way. Next thing are the chords. Chords are being played by 4 bass trombones and tuba playing the root note. As you can see, to add a little bit more energy in the low end to the core rhythmic pattern, the root note played by the tuba is being repeated, instead of being a pedal tone going together with the chords. Every pattern here revolves around the same chords. This is why everything sounds together nicely, because they are playing the exact same notes. So as you can see right here, this is a rhythmic pattern of the trombones and also horns, and the ghost notes are the chords played by the bass trombone and violins. And if I move this MIDI to the ear candy stuff, you can see that I am still using the same notes of the scale and those chords. So in the end, all of those elements together make sense. Last thing, we also have all of the percussions. They are mostly supporting the brass section and accenting the rhythm. One other thing that is not visible on the playlist, because for some reason I hid it within the pattern of the timpani, is also a hand thumb. On its own it sounds like this. But together with the timpani you'll hear the context. So let's summarize what we have thus far. The story of the entire piece begins with this mystical mystery, where we don't really know what to expect. In the second part of the intro, I'm starting to build courage and confidence in the main character, so he can finally fly for the first time. The main theme is of course the moment of the flight, and I wanted the story to have layers. Like an onion, or ogres, because thus far it was pretty one-dimensional. I wanted to make a sudden drastic shift, indicating that, for example, our hero lost control or got hit by something mid-air. And then when the situation is settled, we can build the courage and anticipation for the flight and fly for the last time with the full confidence. So I finally decided to make my first attempt at an action cue. If you've never heard of this term, in the description below you can find an exceptional video about this topic made by Mattia Chiappa, which helped me tremendously finally overcoming my fear of writing an action cue. But in simple terms, you can treat an action cue as a very long transition between sections, where you're not really going to find long melodies that you can hum. These are often very condensed, short phrases played by a variety of instruments, and its main job is to just emphasize the action that is happening. Perfect examples of action cues you can find in pieces made by John Williams. He's definitely a master with that technique. So I wanted to make this introduction of an action cue sudden and unexpected, as if the main character was flying and suddenly something went terribly wrong and we are falling down. So I tried to achieve this, making the switch between the sections very sudden and jarring, giving only a brief window after the main theme to prepare for something. The action cue itself begins with this harp run, supported with cortales, single marimba roll, and bell roll. Throughout the entire first half you can hear both violins that are split into divisi. And then I'm gradually introducing woodwinds. Next layer is the piano. Xylophone playing in octaves. And sopranos. All of those layers combined sounds like this. Next up we have the brass. As you see, those stabs are being played by everything except for the horn. My brass library doesn't provide enough of a bite that I wanted to go for, so I had to go a little bit harder with the layering. As you can see, we have like 6 trombones and bass trombones, 5 trumpets. Naturally, the brass family is really loud, so in the real orchestra scenario, using that many brass instruments would be an absolute overkill. So treat all those midi more like a layer, especially when it comes to the trombones. Every element on its own sounds like this. First, trumpet. 4 trumpets. Tenor trombones. Bass trombones. Tuba. In the middle we have all of the trombone chords slowly rising. And then horn layered with the tuba. I wanted the next brass stab to feel a little different, so I changed the dynamics of the trump, as you can see right here. So even though trombones and tuba are staying more or less the same, the trumpets are making the variation really noticeable. This is what we had before. And for the repetition of the horn line, we have all of the brass instruments except for the horn. Together they sound like this. Here I introduced the same kind of motion as I used for the stabs, because I wanted the very last part to be the build-up for the big hit that is coming right after that. So trumpet is playing this. Four trumpets are playing this. Here are tenor trombones. Bass trombones. And tuba. The brass is being supported by all of the low strings, viola, cello and double bass. Double bass is mimicking the movement of the horn in this spot specifically, and cello and viola are bringing a little bit more drama to everything with this stacking up tremolo. Now I play those together with the brass so you can get the context. And next up we have all of the percussions. I play them together with the entire brass and violin one, so you can get the context what those percussions are doing and how they are accenting the important moments, and also specifically how this tambourine and snare are providing the additional layer to this string pattern that we are hearing for the second time. One other thing, I also made a couple of runs with the harp, cortales and also woodwinds. Together they sound like this. This is cortales alone, the harp, and the funny thing is happening with the woodwinds. As you can see, the clarinet and oboe are split in the middle, and the clarinet is playing the first part and the oboe is playing the second. This gives the entire run a nice switch in the middle, and it gives it a little bit more spice in my opinion. With the flute they sound like this. Like the run is suddenly evolving in the middle. Next up we have this big hit moment that is telling us that during the action cue something went terribly wrong. Like for example, our hero hits the ground or something like this and we don't know if he's still alive or not. Here we have horn, tuba, percussions, church bell and the choir stacked together. First we have two horns, tuba, big soprano chord, and bass is an octave lower. After the hits I am slowly introducing the choirs again. This time they are humming the chords. Together they sound like this. And then the similar thing as the humming choirs is happening within the strings. Here is violin 1, violin 2, viola, cello and double bass. As you can see, I did the same thing as with the humming choir. I introduced the strings gradually during the big hit, so the transition between loud and soft is very smooth. The strings would stick out and draw your attention if I just started playing them, for example, in this spot with their maximum volume. I wanted this texture to be very gentle and smooth. That's why I did that. Now let's hear it together with the choirs. Other than that, the only things we have are a couple of percussions marking the hit. At the end of the action cue, I also added a little call and response within the woodwind to provide something a little bit fresh, since we've heard the texture made out of the humming choir and strings before, and I wanted to keep the listener engaged. On the other hand, this also gave me a great opportunity to reintroduce the rhythm of the woodwinds before the build-up, so the transition between the dark and sad action cue and this mystical preparation to the flight was a bit smoother. Since in the story of the song this moment was the lowest point, where we don't really know what happened to the hero, in this last bar of an action cue specifically, I wanted to give a clear indication to the listener that the hero is okay and we are going to start preparation for the flight one more time. And that's why I really wanted to add those woodwinds over here, together with a trumpet. The trumpet here is playing a shortened and sped up part of the main theme. If I make it longer like this, you'll probably recognize the theme. From this moment we are building again. From top to bottom we have 4 flutes playing the chords from the intro, with an addition of a couple of accents to give them, you know, a little bit more spice. Beneath that we have oboe, 4 clarinets and bassoon. And since it's a very long segment, I have to leave some places, blank spots for the players to breathe. As you can see, I'm trying to give the time for the breath for all of the instruments separately. Like for example, here is the spot for the oboe, but the spots for 2 clarinets are over here. And the other 2 are here. Same thing with the bassoon, it has the spots for the breath in a different moment. I did that because I wanted the woodwinds to feel like they are constantly playing without any interruptions. And when you have that many instruments playing at the same time, you can just subtract 1 or 2 players at a given moment without it really being noticeable or anything. They are all playing staccatissimo, so you won't be able to see the changes in the dynamics with the dynamic lines, because my sample library reacts to the volume of every single note right here when I'm using staccatissimo. So here is the pattern of the dynamics. So as you can see in the second part, the woodwinds are getting louder. Together with the flutes, they sound like this. Since I am reintroducing the core rhythmic pattern from the very beginning of the song, the same thing is happening within the ear candy. Underneath we also have a gentle texture made out of soprano's choir. In the second part of the build-up they are joined by the basses, and I am reintroducing the rhythmic pattern with the sopranos again, with an addition of the second part of the string chords from the intro. Together they sound like this. And at the end, of course, we also have the brass. First we begin with the new melody played by the horn, and in the last part I'm introducing 4 horns patch that is playing the same melody legato and octave higher, and later together we have 6 horns playing the main theme in octaves. At the very end of the build-up I'm also introducing all of the trumpets, trombones and the tuba, with a quick build-up transition into the main theme again. I play them together with the woodwind so you get the context, because the melody of the horn is starting a little bit late. In the second part of the build-up I am also strengthening the core rhythmic pattern with the percussions. So here we have triangle, tambourine, snares, bass drum rolls and hits, and also a hand thump from before hidden within the timpani pattern. Now at last we can move on to the finale. Since I'm introducing additional horns supporting the main theme, there is no longer need for the woodwinds to do that. So here they are joining the trombones and percussions with the rhythm. I felt like supporting the rhythm with the lower tones was unnecessary, so instead the bassoon is playing the root note together with the tuba, double bass and cello. Together with the woodwinds there are of course trombones playing the core rhythm just as before, and because together they are providing just enough energy, the only 2 other instruments supporting them are marimba and xylophone. And just as before they are joined by all of the percussions, so the entire thing sounds like this. Next up we have the horns. These are just 2 legato patches playing an octave apart, and underneath there is also a 4 horns patch that I mentioned before that is also playing an octave higher. So in total we have 6 horns here. But as I briefly mentioned before, this is more of a layering and sound design technique instead of an actual orchestral arranging. In the real orchestral environment 4 horn players would be enough. It's just a case of my brass library that doesn't have enough bite to really stick out when the entire orchestra is playing like this and I want the horn to be the main part. So together they sound like this. Here are 4 horns alone. And here are the 2 horns without the 4 horns patch. Next up, as before, we have the trumpet with the counter melody. Other instruments also playing the main theme are the glockenspiel, This time also the choir does that, instead of supporting the chords and the rhythm. And of course the same as before, violin 1, violin 2 and viola. As you can hear, I also introduced a little fill-ups within the strings between the phrases. Honestly, I'm not sure how possible they are to play in real life, but I felt like they provided a little bit more excitement to the transition, so I left them in. So here we have all of the instruments playing the melody. Then we have bass trombones, tuba with the chords, supported as before by the viola, cello, double bass and sub bass. Together they sound like this. Last but not least, there are of course the other ear candy, playing the core rhythmic pattern from the intro, and also the harp and cortales are providing these little runs. They are definitely inaudible in the entire thing, but the thing about the ear candy is that if you add them, you are not noticing them, but if you subtract them, you feel like there is an additional layer missing in the entire arrangement. So I always make sure to add this additional layer. A couple of other things I left out for the end of the arrangement showcase is a white noise sample. I'll bring it up so you can hear it. As you can see here, I am changing the BPM of the track depending on the moment of the song. And of course there is a bunch of hidden automations. Now that we went through the entire arrangement, I wanted to explain my process a little bit. So initially the entire project didn't start as the flying theme. To be honest, the idea came to me by an accident when I was improvising on piano trying to come up with something completely different. But as it sometimes is, during my messing around I made something like this. As you hear, it's definitely raw and lacks a bit of structure, and also turned out to be a little dramatic, but it felt like an okay start. So after a bit of playing around with it, I decided I wanted to give up the dramatic vibe and I wanted to make it rhythmic, steady and predictable. And eventually this was the final result. Next thing that came to my mind when I structured it like this, I realized that the scale that I'm using is the exact same as the theme from my previous video. What the f is that? How to make music like Skyrim. And if you watch that video, maybe you recognize that the theme is surprisingly similar. And it's true. So this is the theme from that song. But as you can hear, it's too slow and not enough uplifting. I wanted the melody to be very bright and energetic. So first I sped it up. Okay, so now it's definitely more uplifting and could work as an epic theme, but it lacked one other element. It was always resolving down. So I had to just get rid of that and create new endings to each phrase. And this is the final result. So we can even treat this flying theme as an alternative orchestration of the song from my previous video. And sometimes it just works like this, when it feels like a good idea is to just copy yourself. But in order to polish your skills as a composer, it's sometimes actually a great idea to just take one of your older pieces and just flip it upside down, arrange it in a completely different way, if not for a successful result, but just for practice. When I had the main theme and the chords, it was just a matter of stacking them together, and obviously they would work because they are in the same key and working with a similar tempo. Then two other things to do was just to add a couple of filler notes played by the brass in between phrases of the main theme. And then use the notes of the chords to create sustained notes that could be played by the brass and strings. Everything else you can see in this piece is just an addition, accent, filler, alternative of those ideas I just showed you. Like for example, all of the percussions. They're just accenting the theme, giving everything a little bit more energy when necessary, and supporting the rhythm. Of course, if I stick to only those principles, I wouldn't have an entire action cue and some parts of the build-up. So obviously it's not a formula that is going to create an entire song from scratch and you don't have to do anything else. But it is certainly very useful to be able to expand your initial idea, so you have more time to spend on parts that you want to stand out, like an action cue, for example. But overall, if there is just one thing from this video that I really want to pass on to everyone else, is that if you lack any idea, if you're not inspired or anything, don't hesitate to just take one of your older ideas, maybe from a couple of years ago even, and try to give them a new life. Since it's not only that you can make an entire new great piece of music from it, but it is also an amazing practice. And if you need an inspiration or a little bit of guidance how to actually rearrange your old track, you can watch those two videos on screen right now where I show how I made music like Skyrim and Harry Potter. And if you survived this walkthrough, really, just thank you. Leave a like and sub if you enjoyed it, and see you next time.